everybody, and welcome back to Rocky Mountain Readings, where we have been hot and heavy into this wonderful book, The Golem, and the Wondrous Deeds of the Maharal of Prague, the 1909 edition written by Yudl Rosenberg. And yesterday we read a fantastic tale about the wine merchant's daughter and the Duke's son, and how the wine merchant's daughter was kind of kidnapped by the wicked priest Thaddeus, and was kind of forced to try to convert into Christianity, and met the Duke's son, and how that incident fell apart, and Hashem brought it around into something great over in Amsterdam. Just a phenomenal story. If you didn't catch yesterday's reading, I encourage everybody to check it out. It was a beautiful, beautiful tale. But at the end of yesterday's story, we heard that the priest Thaddeus had a downfall. And today we're into chapter 15, which is a very amazing tale about a blood libel by the priest Thaddeus, which caused his final downfall and his banishment from Prague. So, yeah, this is going to be exciting. Hopefully you folks are enjoying this work. Please give me some feedback out there, because it means a lot to me if I'm on a decent track with what readers or viewers want to hear, or if I'm off. And if I'm off, I got to switch it up. And, we want to give you good Torah material that actually scratches the itch you're looking for. And I think we've been doing such heavy reading the last several months that I thought, okay, this as this tale about the Maharal of Prague and these awesome deeds are surrounding his creation of the Golem, as the story goes. We thought it would be interesting, a reprieve from some heavy theological work. But nonetheless, your opinion matters to me. And so please feel free to weigh in. You can always email me at dan.ca@brittlelam.community, or you can drop me a line on Messenger and Facebook, or even in the chat boxes, and I'll do my best to answer any questions or concerns, and I will take everything to heart. So, yeah, let's keep going and see if we can cover some good ground today. So, okay. Very amazing tale about a blood libel by the priest Thaddeus, which caused his final downfall and his banishment from Prague. Let's get into this. This amazing incident took place in the year 5345, or in 1585. In Prague, opposite the great synagogue, stood a very old and tall building that looked like a king's palace from bygone days. It was known as the five-sided palace because of its pentagonal shape. Each of its 5 walls faced a different street, and each wall had 5 tall, thick pillars made of hewn stones. 5 large, wide windows were set between the pillars, and on the roof stood 5 tall towers, which had carved images indicating that this place was built when people still worshipped the sun. And because everything on this building was connected to the number 5, it was called the Five-Sided Palace. This palace did not have one owner. Rather, it was considered part of the properties and chattels of the government. And because the authorities did not want to spend any money for maintenance, the building continually fell into greater disrepair. For the most part, poor people and indigent working men lived there. Under this building ran long, spacious, cave-like cellars. But the tenants feared entering the cellars, for word had it that satyrs danced there and demons had taken possession of the place. By hurling stones and creating a storm wind, they cast a pall of fear and dread upon anyone who wanted to enter. People said that more than one person was hurt when he sought to enter the cellars. Therefore, few tenants lived in that building. In any case, as time passed, the house became more and more dilapidated until it looked like an old ruin. Once before Passover, as the search for leaven had been completed at the Maharal's house, an incident occurred. The old Shemesh, Reb Avram Chaim, was standing next to the Maharal holding a lit candle. Just as the Maharal was about to recite all the leaven, the candle was suddenly extinguished. The Maharal had a custom of never saying anything by heart, but always used his siddur. He once told us that his custom was not out of strictness, but only because, based on the color of the letters in the siddur, heaven revealed future events to him. For there are colors that signify loving kindness. Hello, Ashley G. Welcome. While some signify judgment and others compassion, and the letters in the siddur change to the color of the overriding attribute. One time, while reciting the Avodah portion of the Yom Kippur service, the Maharal burst into bitter tears. At the end of the holiday, we asked him why he had wept, and he explained to us that the same sign of the crimson thread used in the Holy Temple that turned white was also in the Avodah section of his siddur. But this Yom Kippur, the crimson letters did not turn white, for heaven had leveled a great accusation against the Jews. This caused the Maharal great grief, but his weeping mitigated somewhat the severity of the judgment. That is why the Maharal gestured to the Shemesh to kindle the light, for he thought it a happenstance. The Shemesh tried to light the candle a few times, but still the wick sputtered and refused to light. The Maharal's face became white with fear, for he understood at once that the matter was not simple. All the people who stood there were also terrified. The Maharal was obliged to stop. Take the siddur and come with me to the candle burning in the wall lamp, he told the Shemesh. Reb Avron Chaim, recite from the siddur, the paragraph, all the leaven, for word in a loud voice, and I'll respond by repeating the passage word for word by heart. This the Shemesh did. Confused and frightened by this incident, he approached the wall lamp and began to recite all the leaven. But when it came to saying the words in my possession, it seemed to him that the words in the 5 were written in the siddur. So he said out loud for the Maharal to hear, in the 5. The Maharal did not repeat this, but shouted, nu, a hint that the Shemesh had erred. But the Shemesh grew even more confused and began to say it a second time, all the leaven that is in the 5. The Maharal then snapped his fingers, as was his wont when something astounding had occurred. That's it, he cried out in a loud voice. Now I understand that this is a time of trouble for Jacob, and they seek once more to extinguish the light of Israel. Now I also understand the interpretation of the dream I dreamed on the Friday night of the great Sabbath. The Maharal then rushed in a fright to the candle burning in the wall lamp. Because the lamp was set high, the Maharal himself stood on a bench holding the siddur up to the candlelight and recited the words to all my leaven from the siddur properly. When he finished, he ordered all the people who were in his house, who lived in town, to return home at once. No one was left in the Maharal's house except his son-in-law, the Gaon, our saintly master, Rabbi Yitzhak Katz, of blessed memory, the old Shemesh, Reb Avron Chaim, and the other Shemesh, Yosel the Golem. Then the Maharal, relating a terrifying dream he had had on the Friday night of the great Sabbath, flames and fire were coming out of the 5-sided palace because of a great conflagration there, and he saw in his dream a huge tongue of fire leaping out of the 5-sided palace and breaking into the window of the great synagogue, when it was full of the Jews praying. He was very frightened in his sleep and began shouting at the top of his voice until he woke, afraid and terror-stricken. Now I understand the meaning of the dream, said the Maharal. In this 5-sided palace, an accusation and great misfortune has been planned for the citizens of Prague, and we must quickly rid ourselves of it just as we rid ourselves of leaven. And that is why heaven ordained that the Shemesh, Reb Avron Chaim, should say the words, all the leaven in the 5, to remind us that we must get rid of the leaven in the 5-sided palace, where a trap and snare have been set for the citizens of Prague. For a fire has come out of the 5-sided palace and burnt the windows of the great synagogue when all the Jews were in it, and the fact that the candle was extinguished hinted that they wanted to extinguish the light of Israel, and that the misfortune was planned also against me, who is called the light of Israel, because I contain the spark of King David, peace be upon him, who is also called the light of Israel. The Maharal began to probe and inquire how evil against the people of Israel could be found in the 5-sided palace. He himself asked about all the tenants who lived there, who they were and what they did. However, the old Shemesh remembered each one perfectly and knew each one of the tenants well. He recalled each one's name, and not one of them could be suspected of evil intent. For only poor Jews and simple artisans lived there, but one matter extremely agitated and frightened the Maharal. When I was a boy, the old Shemesh told him the first graders would tell each other old legends about the five-sided palace, and everyone related what he had heard from his forefathers. One of these legends was that in ancient times a king lived in this palace who never showed his face to the people of the city. When he had to attend prayer services in the cloister, he went from his residence to the green cloister through a subterranean passage that was built from the cellar of the palace to the cellar of the green cloister. And that priest Thaddeus still burned with rage over the matter of Rebbe Mickleberger's daughter, because his scheme for converting her was thwarted. Moreover, this priest was a great sorcerer and understood that this could have been accomplished by no one but the Maharal, that the girl was stolen from her cloister room, and that the fire was purposely set by the priest's servant in order to camouflage the event. And from the remarks made by the priest Thaddeus, who justified himself afterward in the court before the judges, he seemed to assume that while he was at the priest's conference in Krakow, his servant had taken a large sum of money in exchange for returning the girl to her parents. The priest also assumed that all this was done at the advice of the Maharal, which is why he decided to take vengeance against both his servant and their children, and the Maharal. Indeed, it was true that a terrible blood accusation had been planned against the notables of the city and also against the Maharal himself. Here is how it happened. The priest Thaddeus employed a servant who had a wife and children. The priest's house stood in the courtyard of the green cloister. On one side of the house, the windows faced the cloister courtyard. On the other, the windows looked out at a very large garden surrounded by a wall with an iron gate that opened onto a road outside the city. 2 weeks before Passover, at the onset of spring, when the trees were blooming, the priest's servant and his wife would go out in the afternoon to work several hours in the garden, hoeing and toiling and trimming the trees scattered in the garden and outside of it. Seeing one of the boys separated from his brothers and playing by himself near the priest's house, by deceit, the priest lured him to his house. He took him into the big cellar, slaughtered him, and drained his blood into a vessel. Then he poured the blood into many small flasks and pasted labels on them with the names of notables in the city in Hebrew letters, including those of the Maharal, his sons and son-in-law, and the 3 communal leaders who were called primus. The priest brought all this from his cellar to the cellar of the five-sided palace. He also carried the body of the slaughtered boy there. After passing through the subterranean passage that linked the 2 cellars, he placed everything into an old closet that stood in the cellar. The priest prepared this great blood accusation so that he and the municipal police would be able to attack the Jewish quarter on the eve of Passover and initiate there a wide-ranging search until the accusation would be realized and he could arrest the Maharal himself along with members of his household and the notables of the city. What a plot. All this was done on Friday night of the great Sabbath, and that is why on that night the Maharal had his terrible dream that was described earlier. In the evening, the priest's servants and his wife had finished their gardening work and were about to return home. As they began to gather their children to go back home with them, they noticed one boy missing. They looked for him till nearly midnight and could not find him. In the morning, the priest's servant and his wife came to the priest and told him what had happened to them. The priest replied, "I think the boy surely ran off to play on the road outside the iron gate and got lost in the field." Then he added, "But there is something else you have to fear, since this day is so close to the Passover holiday of the Jews, and they lie in wait every year to slaughter a Christian and take his blood to mix it into their matzahs. So who knows if the boy hasn't fallen victim at the hands of the Jews." These slanderers, eh? Now you have no choice but to report this matter to the chief of police and ask him to quickly search all the Jewish houses. Notice how he always gets somebody else to do his dirty work. The priest also advised his servant's wife, "Tell the police chief that on the day your son disappeared. You looked through the iron gate toward evening, and at distance you saw a Jew in the field carrying a sack on his shoulder with something in it. Tell him the sack moved on his shoulder as though something living were inside it, and no doubt this Jew kidnapped your son for slaughter." And the priest further ordered her, "Weep bitterly and fall at the police chief's feet and beg him to initiate the search as quickly as possible. Also ask him to have the priest Thaddeus accompany the police to help them during this search." Hearing the priest's words, the unfortunate mother burst into tears and ran at once to the chief of police. She fell weeping at his feet and told him everything the priest Thaddeus had instructed her to say. And then she added, "Start the search immediately with the help of the priest Thaddeus." "I'll do everything you've asked of me," the chief replied, "but it won't be possible to do this today because I must first obtain the consent of the mayor. He needs a warrant. I'll make the request today, and tomorrow morning I'll start the search with the help of many men and accompanied by the priest Thaddeus." Then he warned the woman, "But do not reveal anything about this matter to anyone. It is written, however, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. When heaven revealed to the Maharal that misfortune was approaching, which he had to eliminate like leaven, and that this trouble was located in the five-sided palace, he neither rested nor was he still. The Maharal girded his strength at once for a vigorous battle to eliminate this leaven. It is true, said the Maharal, that it's dangerous to enter the cellar of that ruin, but I will rely on the Talmudic adage, no harm befalls those who are sent on a pious mission. Wow. But even though people say it is a place where danger is to be expected, the merit of the Jewish multitude will protect me from all the harm. After midnight, the Maharal took 3 thick Avada tapers and a tinderbox. He gave one to each of his 2 Shemoshim, Reb Avron Chaim, and Yosel the Golem. While he held the third, he also took his staff with him, and all 3 walked silently into the five-sided palace so that no one would be aware of them. Arriving at the steps that led into the cellar, they lit the 3 tapers and continued walking. But when they opened the door, a blast of wind came, and the cellar was filled with dust from strong draught that extinguished all 3 tapers. And they also heard many dogs barking, and a great fright came over them. Don't be afraid, the Maharal told them, but gird your strength and don't move. After the Maharal and Reb Avron Chaim repeated 3 times, O you who dwell in the shelter of the Most High, the wind and dust ceased and the dogs barking subsided too. But as they walked further, stones from the abandoned cellar fell on them. They feared that the vault of the cellar would collapse on them. Go you alone, the Maharal told Yosel the Golem, for even the demons won't harm you. Look carefully in all the rooms, and if you find anything suspicious in connection with the blood libel, bring it to me. The Maharal and Reb Avron Chaim moved back to the door. Only Yosel the Golem proceeded forward by himself, holding the lit Havdalah taper. After looking, he found a little basket with the slaughtered boy in it, wrapped in a fringed prayer shawl, and another basket containing about 30 small blood-filled flasks. Glued onto the flasks were little notes with the names of the Maharal, his son, and the sons-in-law, and other community notables. When Yosel the Golem brought all these to the Maharal, the rabbi commanded, take the slaughtered boy as is and carry him through the subterranean passage to the cellars of the priest Thaddeus' cloister. Look for the priest's wine cellar and hide the boy there among the barrels, well out of sight. Then come back to me using the same passageway. The Golem fulfilled all of the Maharal's orders flawlessly and returned half an hour later from the passage. The Maharal then told his 2 assistants to dig a hole in the cellar floor where they smashed all of the blood-filled flasks with stones. They threw everything into the hole and covered it with earth so that no trace was discernible. After this was done, all 3 men returned home happily. The Maharal commanded them not to tell a soul about what they had seen. On the eve of Passover, at 10 in the morning, the chief of police suddenly appeared in the Jewish quarter, accompanied by many policemen and soldiers. The priest Thaddeus had come along with them too. The The soldiers and police quickly barged into the homes of the Jews in groups of 2 and conducted a thorough search. The police chief and the priest Thaddeus first searched the great synagogue and then the Maharal's house and the houses of the community notables. When they passed the 5-sided palace, the priest told the police chief this place should also be searched, for most of the time the Jews commit their ritual murders in ruins like this. And they also searched all the rooms of the cellar, but they came back as empty-handed as they had come. In the afternoon, they returned to their homes having accomplished nothing. During the search, a pall of deathly dread fell upon the Jews of Prague, but the Maharal immediately declared, "Tell the people in my name to pass the word, not to have the slightest fear, for the trap has been broken as we have fled to safety. Now prepare for Passover with great joy, for the Rock of Israel and its Redeemer has performed hidden miracles for us to save us from false accusations." For several days, the body of the slaughtered boy lay well hidden in the priest Thaddeus' cellar until it began to smell. Since the Christian Easter was approaching, about a week before the holiday, the priest told his servant, "Go down to the cellar, clean it, and make order, and take inventory of all the wine so I can know how much wine to order for Easter." The servant went down to the cellar, followed by the dog that always ran after him. As the servant began his work, the dog scampered to and fro in the cellar, sniffing in every corner as dogs are wont to do when they look for something. Finally, the dog sniffed out the place where the dead boy was hidden. The dog then began to bark lustily and to dart back and forth on the spot. The servant, realizing this was not a trifling matter, began to search in that area until he discovered the boy's corpse. At once he saw it was the missing boy. Terror-stricken, he ran to the police chief and told him what he had seen. The police chief, accompanied by soldiers, came quickly and went down into the cellar and saw that the servant had spoken the truth. Welcome, Geraldine. From San Diego. Nice to have you with us. This has to be the work of priest Thaddeus himself, the servant shouted. He always aspires to attack the Jews and provoke them with the accusation of ritual murder. Everyone knew that the servant was absolutely right. At first, the priest tried to deny everything. "I know nothing at all about this matter." However, through several signs and wonders, his crime became evident, and the priest had to confess that his hands had spilled this blood. But he justified himself by stating, "I committed this murder out of the zealousness for the Christian faith and because my servant robbed Christianity of a precious soul who had lived with me for several weeks. But then, in exchange for a bribe, my servant took from them while I was away at a priest conference in Krakow. He brought her back to her parents. Then the priest added, I also did it to take revenge against the rabbi of the Jews, whose idea it surely was to bribe my servant." Shalom, Sheila. Welcome. It was a joy to chat with you yesterday. Whose idea it surely was to bribe my servant. And that's why I killed his child, to incite a blood libel against the rabbi in order to have my revenge against both of them. But the servant threw the priest's denial back in his face. "Not so. You sneakily lured the daughter of Reb Mikli Berger to you. You forced her to convert and you imprisoned her. And because of the depths of her suffering, she grew sick of living and set her room on fire." The matter ended with the priest Thaddeus' arrest and trial. His punishment was exile to an uninhabited land for the rest of his life. So may all the wicked enemies of Israel perish. Regarding this incident, the Maharal created a humorous play on words. When the Saturday night table hymn mentions protecting the esteemed woman, this refers to the holy Shekinah as well as the children. That means the children of Israel. 5 said the woman to him, which means that by making the Shemesh say 5, the Shekinah was sending me a message to carefully search the 5-sided palace and eliminate the leaven, that is, the impurity from that house. Wow. Wow. All right, let's see if we got another story. The marvelous story of the wonder of wonders that the Maharal revealed to the 2 girls whose 2 children were switched by a midwife. Wow. In Prague, there was a children's teacher called Big Yudl, who engaged 2 orphan lads from Romania to work as assistants in his school. Both were named Burl. One with a swarthy face was called Black Burl, and the other ruddy face was called Red Burl. The two Burls were very fond of each other and cooperated in every respect of their lives, even sharing all their food. They found favor both in the eyes of the teacher and the townfolk, for they did their work faithfully and honestly. That is why they managed to save up some money for a dowry and both made fine matches in Prague. Even after their weddings, the two could not part from each other and they decided to become partners in business. Their first venture, ritual slaughter in one slaughterhouse, thrived and they gradually prospered. Then they abandoned butchery and began dealing in oxen. Here, too, they attained such great success they were considered the biggest ox merchants in the town and were known as the two rich Burls from Prague. Then they bought a large walled house in Prague and established their residence together there, living side by side next door to each other. Only in the matter of children were the two rich partners unequal, for Red Burl had healthy sons and daughters, alive and well, while Black Burl had no sons but many daughters, not all of whom survived. The wives of both Burls got along amicably and both used the same midwife known as Ethel, the midwife. Still, in her heart of hearts, the great envy burned in Black Burl's wife concerning her partner, Red Burl's wife. But since she was wise and of kindly disposition, Black Burl's wife always restrained herself with all her might and displayed no enmity toward Red Burl's wife. Indeed, Ethel, the midwife, understood full well what lay in the heart of Black Burl's wife, and she was overcome with compassion for her, for she felt the woman's misfortune deep within her. That is why Ethel began to think of plans and schemes how to do Black Burl's healthy sons and daughters. How to do Black Burl. Sorry, this thing seems to be jumping. How to do Black Burl's wife a big favor. The midwife wanted her to be happy and to enable her to brag to her husband, "Heaven has taken away my disgrace, for I too have given birth to a baby boy." So it happened the wives of the two Burls went to the ritual bath the same night. When Esther learned of this, she had the following idea. If both women became pregnant that night and Black Burl's wife had a girl and Red Burl's had a boy, and if both delivered around the same time, she would secretly switch the babies and place the baby boy next to Black Burl's wife and the baby girl next to Red Burl's wife. In fact, that is exactly what happened. Both became pregnant at the same time, and delivery too took place about the same time. Red Burl's wife went into labor first, and Mazel Tov. Hold on. And gave birth to a boy, but Esther, the midwife, cried out, "Mazel Tov, it's a girl." She apparently thought that even if Black Burl's wife also had a boy, she would switch babies anyway because Red Burl's children were strong and healthy and more prone to survive than Black Burl's children. As to her shout of "Mazel Tov, it's a girl," she planned to make up an excuse later by saying that since her neighbor, Black Burl's wife, who was longing for a son, was about to give birth, therefore afraid of the evil eye, she had said a daughter was born until she saw Black Burl's wife's delivery. The next day, the time came for Black Burl's wife to give birth, and what the midwife had hoped for came to pass. She, too, gave birth to a boy. The midwife cried out, "Mazel Tov," at the birth of a son, and Black Burl's house was full of gladness and joy. Later, the midwife revealed the truth in Red Burl's house. They, too, had a boy, and she justified her earlier remark by saying, "To avoid the evil eye and prevent envy, I was afraid of telling the truth until after Black Burl's wife gave birth," an explanation that was accepted in Red Burl's house with cries of approval. That night, when everyone was asleep in both houses, the midwife secretly switched the babies, and no one was aware of her deed. The midwife, too, kept this matter a deep secret and told no one about it. But in her diary, when she would punctiliously record each day's events, she also described the switch, noting the date, month, and year the two boys were born to the two Burls. She also wrote that she had secretly exchanged the babies and placed the son of the red burl into the bed of the black burl's wife, and the son of black burl in the bed of red burl's wife, adding that she did this for a reason known only to herself alone. But since there was no one who would even occasionally glance at her diary, the matter sank into oblivion like a stone cast into deep waters. The wives of the two Burls nursed their sons, and the thought never crossed their minds that they were nursing infants not their own. The boys grew up, each one with parents not his own. Then Esthrel, the midwife, died suddenly, and her daughter, a midwife too, inherited her possessions, including Esthrel's diary, and brought them to her house. But since the daughter had no need of her mother's diary, she stored it in the cellar along with her other old and unwanted things. The two Burls began to marry off their children and made excellent matches. However, since Black Burl still had two unmarried daughters and the young son who had been switched, and Red Burl still had four sons, two daughters and the youngest son who also had been switched, the time was not ripe for them to arrange matches with each other. But for some years now, people would often suggest that the two Burls, the loving parents, should also be bound in marriage, that Black Burl's only son marry Red Burl's youngest daughter, who was only 1 year older than he. Family and friends all agreed this was a very proper match. In short, they concluded the arrangements, wrote the engagement contract, and prepared a splendid betrothal feast in keeping with the style of the very wealthy. As the time for the wedding drew near, the two fathers asked Maharal to lead the ceremony under the chuppah. Such was the custom among prosperous Prague Jews, who tried their utmost to have the great honor of having the Maharal himself officiate at their children's marriage. The Maharal came to the wedding, but something astounding occurred during the ceremony. When he took the wine goblet to recite the blessing consecrating the marriage, the goblet fell from his hands to the floor and the wine spilled. Everyone assumed that the press of the large crowd had caused the goblet to fall accidentally from the Maharal's hands. Consequently, the guests moved back and made room around the Maharal. The goblet was refilled for the recitation of the blessing. So it seems like, they were going to marry a brother and sister because the one child was switched at birth. But nothing helped, for as soon as the Maharal began to chant, "Blessed art thou," just before he said God, the goblet fell to the floor once more. The great fear overwhelmed the Maharal. He was so upset his face turned white. The guests, too, became frightened and amazed at what had happened. Meanwhile, the old Shemesh, Reb Avron Chaim, looked at the wine bottle and noticed there was not enough wine to refill the goblet. And since the Maharal's custom was to recite a blessing only over wine from his own cellar, Reb Avron Chaim turned to the mute Yudl the Golem. "Run quickly to the Maharal's house," he shouted, "and bring another bottle of wine from the cellar." Yudl the Golem flew from the great synagogue where the wedding was taking place to the Maharal's house nearby. But as he approached the door, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. From afar, it looked as if he was talking and arguing with someone unseen. Many in the wedding party yelled, "Bring the wine to him." But rather than going to the cellar, Yudl the Golem went to the courtyard where he wrote a little note composed of 8 words. "The groom and bride are brother and sister." Whoa! So instead of wine, Yudl the Golem brought the note to the wedding canopy and handed it to the Maharal. The enraged guests wanted to tear Yudl the Golem apart like a herring, but they realized at once that he was not someone to fool with. Everyone fell silent, waiting to see what would happen next. Seeing the note agitated the Maharal even more, and his face turned red. "Ah, woe," he cried, "brother and sister." The guests were stunned at this astonishing turn of events and gathered that something strange had taken place. Meanwhile, they all heard the Maharal asking Yudl the Golem, "Who told you the groom and bride are brother and sister?" Yudl the Golem moved a few steps away from the crush of the crowd and gestured to the Maharal to follow him. He pointed to a window of the synagogue to indicate that the man still standing there had revealed the secret to him and ordered him to inform the Maharal also. The Maharal followed and stood facing the window. He looked up and gazed at it for a while, as did all the people, but they saw nothing. Then the Maharal rejoined the guests. The ceremony can no longer take place today, he announced as he stood again under the canopy, because a thorough investigation will first have to be initiated, and then he gave the order, distribute the wedding feast food among the poor. That night, after midnight, the Maharal summoned Yudl the Golem privately to his room, gave him a secret order, and handed him his staff. Yudl the Golem then ran to a point outside the city, came back an hour later to the Maharal, and returned his staff. Later, it was learned that the Golem had gone to the cemetery by order of the rabbi to summon the dead Estherol, the midwife, to prepare herself for the courtroom trial the following day before the Maharal. The next morning, the Maharal ordered, set a place for me and the two other judges in the great synagogue a few feet from the northeast corner, and put up a small wooden partition, then proclaimed that no one who prays here this morning should go home after services, but remain in the synagogue and stand on the western side behind the bima. After the Maharal had finished praying, he sat at the prepared table with the two other judges, all of them wrapped in their talits and tefillin. Then the rabbi sent the old Shemesh, Reb Avron Chaim, to bring the in-laws, the two burls and their wives, and also the groom and their bride. When they arrived in the synagogue, the rabbi placed them at the southern side of the table, and he asked the two burls and their wives to tell him everything they had said and done after their weddings. From their remarks, he concluded that they had not deliberately exchanged babies or consented to the switch. Then the Maharal called Yudl the Golem and placed his staff in his hand in the presence of the entire congregation. He commanded him, Yudl, please go to the cemetery and bring back to us the soul of Estherol the midwife, so that she can give us a full explanation. The Maharal also handed Yudl the Golem a little note, and he left the synagogue. All the men of the synagogue, now terror-stricken, began whispering to one another. Then the Maharal stood and called out loudly to them, I am asking you not to be afraid. Remain calm, for no harm will befall you. The entire congregation fell silent and calmed down. Half an hour later, Yudl the Golem approached the Maharal and returned his staff. He also pointed to the wooden barrier erected in the corner of the synagogue and signaled that he had fulfilled his mission. The woman was now behind the partition. Ooh, this is a ghost story. The pall of death fell upon everyone. The entire congregation seemed to be petrified. They closed their eyes and did not budge. Then the Maharal's voice was heard speaking loudly to the dead woman. We, the court of the lower realm, decree that you, Esther, tell us down to the last detail how it came about that this groom and bride are brother and sister. The dead woman immediately began to tell the story from beginning to end of how she had switched the baby boys and why she had done this. I acted not out of treachery or nastiness, but out of compassion and for the sake of the peace between the two barrels' wives. The men gathered in the synagogue heard only the sound of the midwife's voice, but the judges, the in-laws, and the groom and bride heard everything and understood every word Estherol said. At the end of her remarks, the dead woman added, It is now 12 years after my death, and my soul still has not found proper repose, and will not find it until I set aright what I have ruined. And because of the merit of the Maharal, I was granted permission to prevent him from officiating the wedding ceremony of a brother and a sister due to my switching the babies. Because had the ceremony not been interrupted, my soul would have been swallowed up in the lowest depths of hell without any chance of redemption. The midwife concluded her remarks amid weeping. Have pity on my soul and set the matter right, she asked the court. Return each of the sons to his rightful family and ask the in-laws and the groom and bride to forgive me with all their heart, and then my soul will be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. Then Estherol said further, if the court does not believe me, I can offer proof about my statement. Look from my diary, which is an account of the babies whose midwife I have been, and you will see recorded there the day, month, and year the children were born. The fact that I switched the babies for a reason known only to me is also recorded there. And had I been of sound mind at the time of my death, I surely would have confessed this deed and been scrupulous about setting the matter right. But because I died suddenly and my rational faculty also ceased at once, I couldn't correct this wrong in time before my death. Now her words could no longer be heard, only the sound of weeping, and their heart. And then my soul, only the sound of weeping, and the entire congregation in the synagogue wept along with her. Hearing that this entire story was written in her diary, the Maharal immediately sent his two Shemoshim to summon the midwife's daughter to appear before him and bring all the diaries written by her dead mother. The men tarried there a full hour until they found the half-torn diary in the cellar. They brought it to the Maharal and found that everything the dead Esrel had said was true. The Maharal and his two judges began discussing the verdict to be rendered. First, they decided that the dead Esrel, the midwife, had to request forgiveness from the groom and bride who had been humiliated because of her. And if the two offered her a complete pardon, she would be considered innocent and free of all punishment. At once, the tearful voice of the dead woman was heard saying, I, Esrel, who was your midwife, hereby request your forgiveness. We forgive you completely, the groom and bride replied. Then the Maharal and his two judges stood and declared aloud, we of the court of the lower realm exempt you, Esrel, the midwife, from all punishment. You will also be exempt from all punishment in the upper realm. Go in peace and rest in peace until final peace comes. Wow. Just goes to show you the way the rabbis teach that we must, make amends with those that we have sinned against in this world. Forgiveness from Hashem has to do with our incorrect deeds that only have to do between us and God. But if you have in fact wronged a specific person, you've got to do your best to try to make amends, and Hashem knows your heart, and it begins to correct and truly amend the situation. For you never know how dark or deep the hurts can go. Sometimes something that might seem like a simple offense to you really, really, really hurt deep somebody, and maybe was the cause of a big stall in their life and derailed their joy for a long period. And you don't want to be that person that's wronged. I remember when I was a young boy, I got in a lot of scraps, and I remember, one kid who thought I was a bully. I remember bumping into him when we were older, and we sat down and had a beer together and got into some chit chat. And, I actually apologized for, a lot of because I knew how hurt he was, but the person was just somebody who was very weak and always causing issues. And of course, it's not my position to judge another, especially when you're a child. But the point of the matter is, I had known in my heart of hearts that I may have been a little hard on the kid when we were children, and the opportunity had presented itself when we were older, 20-something years later. And so I had to express the sincere and there was a release there. And all I can say is I encourage everybody, as this story encourages, or you don't want to be like the dead Esther here, getting brought back from the dead to have to get forgiveness. It doesn't quite happen, but some of the rabbis I've heard share on this story in the past say that the Maharal's staff was given to the Golem because it was that staff that was allowed the Golem to actually take her soul back to the courtroom in the great synagogue there. Cookie Monster, glad to have you with us. Then the Maharal gave the order, take the dividing partition that was in the corner of the synagogue and push it aside as a sign that the dead woman is no longer here. Now the Maharal called all the men that had gathered in the synagogue and told them, we now know the truth of the incident concerning the exchange of the two girls' babies by Esrel the midwife. Therefore, this groom and bride should be considered brother and sister, children of the red barrel. Moreover, the youngest son of the red barrel is really Black Barrel's only son. The Maharal further suggested, it seemed to me that if the two Burls and their children are willing, it would be just if they remained in-laws as before. Black Burl's only son should marry the bride, Red Burl's youngest daughter, and the wedding should take place quickly, in fact, next week. The two Burls immediately consented to the Maharal's proposal. They asked their children, who also agreed. The Maharal ordered the new engagement contract written then and there in the synagogue in the presence of the entire congregation. This was done. Wine and cakes were distributed to everyone, and the Maharal gave them his blessing. Then the Maharal ordered the synagogue's great book of record brought to him. He inscribed a summary of this incident in the book and signed his name. He also told the judges to sign their names also. The Maharal blessed the groom and bride with good fortune and success in their match, and then sent everyone home. He also ordered, take a plank from the partition placed in the corner in front of the dead woman and nail it in as a permanent memorial. The Shamoshim did this. The wedding took place the following week amid great splendor. The Maharal himself officiated and also attended the wedding feast. He was very happy that heaven had prevented him from marrying a brother and sister. This match lasted many years in Prague. The couple contributed generously to the charity, and they lived a pleasant life of wealth and honor. What a story. Wow. Well, we got time for one more, so let's do it, right? Chapter 17. The astounding story of the Torah that fell to the floor on Yom Kippur. Whoa. Let's see what this is about. In Prague in 1587, a sad incident occurred on Yom Kippur after the Minshat Torah reading in the great synagogue, where the Maharal prayed. One of the congregants who was honored with the mitzvah of lifting up the Torah let it slip from his hands, and the Torah fell to the floor. This sorely grieved and depressed the Maharal. First, he ordained that everyone who would witness the Torah falling was to fast on the day prior to the eve of Sukkot. However, the Maharal understood that his moral obligation would not be fulfilled with such fasting, for the Rock of Israel does not desire fast, but the extirpation of the evil deeds that prompted the above incident. For surely the Torah falling was not a gratuitous event. Although the Maharal diligently investigated the cause of this incident, he was not successful and felt sad of heart. On the day of the fast, during a dream, the Maharal asked heaven to inform him why the Torah had fallen. But he was not given a clear answer, merely a hint, like an unresolved riddle whose solution the Maharal could not fathom. The reply was a jumble of words and letters the Maharal could not understand. Do not YW or WYW lean KYMTR. The Maharal then decided to use Yudl the Golem for this matter, and he came up with the following idea. He wrote the 17 letters, all of the words on 17 pieces of paper, each letter on a different piece, and he mixed them up. Then he summoned Yudl the Golem and told him, line up all the letters in one row so that one letter joins another for easy reading and comprehension. Yudl the Golem did not ask or probe, neither did he delve deeply. He merely set the pieces of paper in the following order. Do not lie, WYNYYKMTR. The Maharal saw at once that it meant do not lie with your neighbor's wife to defile yourself with her. Yom Kippur Minshat Torah reading. The Maharal quickly realized that this quotation from the Yom Kippur Minshat Torah reading hinted that the man who had been given the honor of lifting up the Torah had transgressed with a married woman. Whoa! He sent Yudl the Golem to that man with a letter summoning the man under suspicion immediately to the Maharal. And when Yudl the Golem was sent to summon someone, that man knew it was absolutely forbidden to refuse or even delay and temporarily postpone the matter. For it had happened more than once that Yosel the Golem would snatch the reluctant man, put him on his shoulder, and carry him through the streets of the city to the Maharal's house, like one carries a sheep to slaughter. The man under suspicion, the one who had lifted the Torah, came at once to the Maharal, who brought him into a private chamber and locked the door. I'm asking you to admit in good faith the sin you've committed, the Maharal told him. For the Torah fell to the floor on Yom Kippur only because of your sin. The man realized he had been caught by the Maharal like a fish on a hook and knew he could not deny his wrongdoing. So he immediately confessed his misdeed and declared, I have been sinning for a long time with my partner's wife. The Maharal imposed a certain penance on the man and also sent for the sinning woman. And the matter was set aright according to the law of Torah. Wow. Just amazing how that divine providence guided the Maharal. He viewed, now I don't know if you've ever seen the Torah scroll in the ark in a synagogue. I have only had the honor of being in one once, and it was a private tour where they let me use some books in their library, but they walked me through the synagogue before getting into the library, and they showed me the Torah scroll. But of course, being a non-Jewish, I was not allowed to touch it, or they would have to break it. Right? It's not allowed to be used, and the expense of these Torah scrolls, these are not printed like on a printing press. They are all handwritten and therefore quite valuable. And one of the first broadcast series I did was with Rabbi Baruch Gardner, who was a world-class sofer. And you actually have to be a sofer with them to be sanctioned to write them. But more than being sanctioned to write them, the time and effort involved, every dot, every line, everything has to be 100%. Without any deviation, and this is how they have preserved safely the Torah over the millennia, all the way back to the time of Moses. And so the value of this, and to have it dropped on Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, spoke to the Maharal on such a deep level that something was amiss. And something was not right, and he inquired of the Lord, but he also told the congregants to fast over it, right, because they want to avert something. But you just see how I've met a lot of people that imagine they're empathic and they see, situations forming, and the point of the matter is that the Maharal noted this important incident based on the value that he held for Torah, and on the high holy day of Yom Kippur, after Rosh Hashanah, where they believe Rosh Hashanah, it's set in heaven, and on Yom Kippur it's sealed. And to drop that Torah on that, it spoke to him at such a level that he was troubled at heart, get the people to fast and inquire of Hashem, why is this so? And Hashem, brought it to light of the reason, through the Golem there, and he discerned that the man that was given the honor to hold the Torah up on that day, Hashem rejected, and the Torah fell to the ground in the man's hands. And just goes to show you nothing hidden. It's not going to be revealed. And hopefully we all take that to heart and do right in this world, and are thankful for the things and opportunities that we do get, and more so that we correct the injustices that we, in fact, may have inflicted. In the wake of disaster that some people leave, they don't realize how broad, like a wake on a boat, it just keeps spreading out like a wave, and it gets broader. And sadly, we don't want to be responsible for leaving a wake of disaster in any way, shape, or form. Well, I may have somebody ringing my doorbell here shortly. My wife is waiting for an adjuster and she's off at work, so I've got to keep an eye out. If my door rings, I may have to go. But do we start one more? I think we should, because I would love to maybe knock this off by tomorrow, and I think at the rate it's rolling, I got to keep going. Oh, okay. Chapter 18. The attack on Yosel the Golem. Okay, so let's read this story. During the Maharal's tenure as chief rabbi of Prague, whenever the Jews quarreled, they had the despicable custom, habitual with them, of insulting and denigrating one another with the epithet Nadler. This term was uglier and far worse than bastard, for Nadler suggested that pure Jewish blood did not flow in that person's veins. This insult had taken root among them during the expulsion from Spain and Italy, when many Jews were forced to apostatize and pass into the Gentile community. After the decree of expulsion was annulled, these Jews returned to their faith in other lands. Many of these conversos also came to Prague, and many had wives from other countries who later converted to Judaism. The barbs of insulting appellation Nadler were aimed at their children and their descendants. When the Maharal saw that this caused havoc in the lives of some families and even affected some of the leading Torah luminaries of the generation, he was determined to eradicate this ugly curse from Jewish lips so that no one in Prague or the rest of the country would ever utter that word again. And how often today do we need to see a lot of derogatory statements just done away with? The Maharal assembled many great rabbis and gaons. The word gaon means wise men, from all over the country, and to the accompaniment of the ram's horn and black candles, they promulgated a severe and awesome ban of excommunication on anyone who let the demeaning word Nadler pass his lips to offend a fellow Jew. No matter who he was, the Maharal's ban had its desired effect, and the Jews took great care not to use this humiliating term. However, no sites are devoid of base and impudent men. Among the circle of porters in Prague, 3 arrogant, licentious, and insolent scoundrels were still using the offensive insult, Nadler. Several weeks after the promulgated ban, hearing this, the Maharal was furious. He sent the old Shemesh Reb Avron Chaim to summon the leader of these hooligans. The Maharal planned to persuade him in a peaceable manner to desist from his evil path. But the porter paid no attention to the Shemesh's remarks and refused to go with him. I'm too busy now, he declared, laughing at the Shemesh. I'll go when I have some time. When the Shemesh related to the Maharal the porter's brazen response, the rabbi became even more incensed. He assembled a few sturdy youths and told them to prepare a batch of switches and some strong rope. Then he summoned Yosel the Golem and told him, go seize that porter now, throw him over your shoulder, and bring him to the courtroom. Yosel the Golem departed at once for the porter's house. He sought and found him, grabbed him by the scruff of his neck, and threw him over his shoulder. Then he carried him like a sheep through the city streets and brought him to the courtroom. Even though this porter was no weakling either, and wrong, even though he was no weakling and always bullied everyone, against Yosel the Golem, his bravado vanished. And after Yosel the Golem graced him with a few smacks, and he had to submit to him. Once the Maharal was informed of the porter's presence in the court, he ordered, bind him with the rope and lash him with the switches as much as he can bear, so he'll remember for a long time the honor accorded to him. Now he'll think twice before uttering that despicable word again. The Maharal's command was carried out by those young men along with Yosel the Golem, who stood next to the porter and went at it vigorously like an ox driver goading his ox. After the beating, the men ordered the porter, take off your sandals and go barefoot to the Maharal for a rebuke. Once you admit you're wrong and promise you won't commit any further folly, the Maharal will lift the ban that's been placed on you. The porter was obliged to obey all the orders. Afterward, he plucked up his remaining strength and sluggishly made his way home as through though crawling on all fours. At home, he had to lie in bed about 2 weeks until his wounds healed and he recuperated sufficiently to walk normally again. But in the scourge porter's heart, the fire of revenge burned secretly, and he decided to get even with the men who had whipped him. Most of all, he wanted revenge against Yosel the Golem. He not only sought bruise for bruise, literally, but he desired to totally eliminate the Golem from this world. The porter secretly summoned his friends and told them, let's deal shrewdly with Yosel the Golem and come up with a scheme to finally get rid of him. They decided to take him by surprise and could easily have killed him had he been someone else and not Yosel the Golem. This is the plan they devised. It was the Maharal's custom to have fresh water brought to him from a deep well on Saturday night, which was heated up for his enjoyment. Before the arrival of Yosel the Golem, the other Shamoshim would bring the rabbi the pitcher of water, but because it was often bitterly cold in winter and the ground near the well was ice-covered, they slipped several times and fell with the pitcher of water. Therefore, using Yosel the Golem for such errands was a great boon in such instances, and he was given the task of taking the pitcher and drawing water from the well every Saturday night after Havdalah. He never slacked off and was not fazed by cold or snow or darkness of night. He did not even wait for the order, but went on his own to bring the water. And that is how the attack on Yosel the Golem was planned. On Saturday night, during Hanukkah, when it was freezing cold and icy, the hooligans hid by that well. Yosel the Golem approached and lowered the pole with the bucket into the well to draw water. When he bent his head and as his draws of water are wont to do, lowered most of his torso into the space of the well, his hidden attackers struck. They seized Yosel the Golem's legs and threw him into the well head first and legs up. Before the Golem could twist out of their hands, he was already cast into the water. The pole and the empty bucket went flying out of the well, and Yosel the Golem got thoroughly soaked as he sank into the depths of the well. Then he floated up and began flailing the water with his hands. Knowing that this would be his end, the hooligans had prepared heavy stones in advance, which they now threw into the well to smash Yosel the Golem's skull and force him to drown. And so it happened. The stones rained down on his head and injured his nose and one eye, making him sink deeper into the water. As soon as the hooligans had thrown all the stones down at him, they fled, but Yosel the Golem saved himself by floating up again. Meanwhile, the men at the Maharal's house waited for the water to prepare his hot drink for the rabbi. Seeing that Yosel the Golem had not returned with the pitcher of water, the old Shemesh Reb Avron Chaim took a lamp, called 2 other men, and went to the well to look for the Golem. On the ground near the well, they recognized the Maharal's pitcher and realized at once that something was amiss. They shone a lamp into the well to look for Yosel the Golem. As soon as he saw the light, the Golem began splashing to signal his presence. Then the men lowered the pole with the bucket into which Yosel the Golem sat until they pulled him out of the well, barely alive. Bruised, wounded, and bloodied, they took him back to the Maharal's house, where they removed his wet clothes, bathed his wounds, and bandaged his head. The Maharal immediately came to see Yosel the Golem. You will be fine, he assured him, and instructed the men. Lay him down in his bed next to the stove. There Yosel the Golem warmed himself and fell asleep. But it was not until 3 days later that he was able to leave his bed to go outside, walking with a cane. On that day, the Maharal summoned him. What happened to you by the well, he asked, and do you know who did this to you? Yosel the Golem answered by writing down everything that had happened to him. He also told the Maharal that among the attackers he recognized the porter who had been whipped in the courtroom. In noting this, Yosel also asked the Maharal for permission to have his revenge of the porter. No, I will not let you do this, the Maharal replied, for retribution will come suddenly from heaven. Soon thereafter, a black mange suddenly infested the porter's arm, an extremely dangerous excrescence called the black scurf. Oh, To prevent the infection from spreading on his bloody body, the doctors cut pieces of his flesh daily, but since nothing helped, they concluded there was no hope for him. Then the porter acknowledged that he was punished only because of his disrespect for the Maharal. He narrated down to the minutest details how he and 3 of his friends had attacked Yudl the Golem, thrown him into the well, and rained large stones down on him. The porter then sent his wife and sons to the Maharal to weep before him, beg for his forgiveness, and request that he remove the plague of death from him. Bubonic plague or black plague back then. But the Maharal refused to see them, and the porter died an excruciating death. Thereafter, his 3 friends who had helped him attack the Golem visited the Maharal and tearfully confessed their wrongdoings, for they feared they might die like the porter. They justified their behavior by saying, the porter enticed us and even bribed us to join him, but now we will get our deed. We're asking for forgiveness, and we'll take upon ourselves any penance and pay any fines you impose on us. The Maharal ordered them to pay a certain sum to the yeshiva to support Torah study. As for penance, each of you will have to fast 40 days this year, and each week recite the entire book of Psalms. The porters did this, and by obeying all of the Maharal's instructions, they remained alive. Wow. You know what? I think we're going to stop it there because I've got things to do here, and I hope you folks have enjoyed the class today or the reading. But please join us again tomorrow. We're going to come back with more excellent tales of the wondrous deeds of the Maharal of Prague, along with the Golem. These are well-written stories. The poor Golem getting thrown down a well and rained down boulders just goes to show you the wickedness of men and how they scheme and plot. It's terrible sometimes, but I don't know if we'll finish this book tomorrow, but we'll be very close. So, I could keep going, except my wife asked me to do a task, and it's time sensitive. So I think for today, we'll end for Rocky Mountain readings. Please, we'll be back tomorrow at the same time for more of the Golem and the wondrous deeds of the Maharal of Prague. And we hope that you all are blessed and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye for now.